Good evening, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here tonight to be able to celebrate the work of our colleague, Julia Sallabank, and also the work of the Department of Languages, Cultures and Linguistics and the School of Humanities. And I come partly with apologies from your dean, Graham Earl, who's just got off a plane from Saudi Arabia and is staggering. So I'm very happy to step in and fill this role of kind of MC of the evening. Just wanted to say these inaugural lectures, we started them up again, I think, last year. And if you've been to any of the ones previously in this series, this is our last of the term, obviously. But they're a fantastic opportunity to celebrate the research achievements of our colleagues, which is really important, and many of us just don't get enough time to do that in our regular day here at SOAS. So it's wonderful to be able to just pause and reflect and learn from our colleagues, and as well to celebrate just the amazing kind of research that goes on very often, as we know, not in isolation, but in collaboration with lots of other people. So thank you for being here to share that with us this evening. I am not going to introduce Julia because that job will go to her testimonial giver, but I will present her testimonial speaker, who is Dr. Candide Simard, who's come back to SOAS, having been a senior teaching fellow here before she left to join the University of the South Pacific in 2018. Her research interests include prosody and language documentation, and she's contributed to the documentation of Jamanjung and other languages in Australia, and participated in several research projects, not only in Australia, but Thailand, Nigeria, and the Pacific, often focusing on the intersection of traditional knowledge and linguistics. It's really wonderful to have you back at SOAS. Welcome back, and we look forward to hearing your testimonial for Julia. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. It is my privilege to introduce Professor Julia Sallabank. Julia is recognized internationally as a leading expert in language revitalization and language policy. She has contributed original theoretical work that has shaped how we understand linguistic sustainability. When she joined the department back in 2007, at a time when our focus was largely on language documentation and description, she brought a fresh and transformative perspective, introducing conceptual insights that expanded the field's intellectual horizons and shifted departmental conversations towards revitalization, empowerment, and community-led practice. She has played a key role to revitalize Guernesiais. For those who are not so sure, this is a language spoken in Guernsey, a Channel Island, where she maintains an active role in policy work, ongoing research, and resources development. Her expertise has further been applied in a range of international contexts. For example, in Thailand, in collaborations with Mahidol University, in the Cook Islands in the Pacific, and closer to home, here in Europe. Pardon me. She's contributed to policy development and the preservation of minority languages globally. Julia has published extensively. Sorry, I have a sore throat. Julia has published extensively. She is the author of the foundational book called Endangered Languages, Attitudes, Identities and Policies. She has co-edited volumes that continue to serve as key references for researchers and practitioners. I'm thinking of Language Revitalization, a practical guide, Endangered Languages, Belief and Ideologies in Language Documentation and Revitalization, and the Cambridge Handbook of Endangered Languages. Her list of papers and book chapters is extensive. She has published in high-impact journals and edited volumes. She is consistently advancing innovative perspectives. And Julia is not only a prolific writer, she is also regularly invited to speak at national and international conferences. In addition, over the years, Julia has secured substantial project funding from national and international agencies leading large-scale research projects. She's currently leading, for example, the project titled Revitalising Languages, Safeguarding Cultural Diversity. So this is Rise Up. It's an ERC Horizon project in collaboration with Vienna University in Austria and 6 other organizations. From 2016 to 2018, she was leading engaged humanities in Europe, capacity building for participatory research. This is very hard, this title. Capacity building for participatory research in language cultural heritage, linguistic cultural heritage. I'm sorry, Julia. I told you I had problems with this title. So it's also an ERC 2020 twinning project. This time was a collaboration with the University of Warsaw in Poland and the University of Leiden in the Netherlands. So she has secured funding for collaborative and interdisciplinary research from British Academy, Newton Fund Arcadia. I'm not going to list all of them. The list is just too long to detail. These achievements are matched by her dedication to teaching. Julia has designed several courses in the linguistics department. I say linguistics, it's changed name a few times since she's been here, but let's say linguistics department here at SOAS. And her courses are constantly revised and updated. She's a dedicated supervisor. She's guided MA and PhD students over the years. She sort of cares very much for their academic and their professional development. So I'm just going to name a few, and I'm sorry if I forget some. Jeff, Birgul, Sarah, Ellen, Zaina, Fiona, Takako, Lingxia, Georgette, Miho, Nahida, Yuxel, Becky, Vasiliki can all vouch for her insightful supervision. I may forget some people. There were a lot of people she's been supervising over the years. Julia is also very committed to academic outreach. She is on the board of several journals and scientific committees, for instance, the Guernsey Language Commission, the Standing Committee of the International Conference for the Revitalizations of Indigenous and Minority Languages. Not easy. Lingua Pax International, and here at SOAS she's a member of GLOCAL. She's also on the board of the journal Living Languages. Again, just a few examples of her very multiple commitments. So this commitment to broader impact is evident in her engagement with community partners, policymakers, and cultural institutions. And she really cares to make her research, make wider audiences benefit from her research beyond the university sector. Through her scholarship, extensive publication, deep commitment to postgraduate supervision, she stands as one of the most respected figures in the field of language revitalization and language policy today. Okay, I will end my introduction at this point and hand over to Professor Sallabank for her lecture titled Language Revitalization and Reclamation, Theorising, Processes and Ideologies. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Candide, for that amazing introduction. I don't know how I'm going to live up to it. I'm going to have to take this off now because it's really uncomfortable. It's far too small, I'm afraid. Thank you so much to everyone for coming, particularly. Okay. So I've just managed to put water on my clicker. Let's see if it works. Okay, so I'm going to introduce myself in Guernesiais, my heritage language, which I've learned a bit. Si la Julia m'avait visé autour la ravigoterie de la langue, des langues, des petites langues, et comme tu nous proposes autour chemin. I'm going to be talking about language revitalisation and reclamation and theorising the processes and ideologies of that. Right, so here we go. The outline of this, I'm going to be talking, first of all, a little bit about diversity and resilience in general, then seguing on to linguistic diversity in particular, and then on to the key topic of most of my research over the last 20-25 years. Okay. Whew, yes, I'm really, really nervous. So, diversity has had a bit of a battering lately in the current political and economic climate. So I think it's worth saying that this is something that we need to protect. And ecological diversity, we've seen the effects of the problems with that over the last few years. Cultural diversity is also under threat. Gender equality, and therefore diversity of thought, and as part of this whole process, people are shifting from smaller languages to larger ones all around the world. SOAS is pleased to call itself the World's University. Here's a picture of that. And we take pride in the multiculturality and multilinguality of all of our students and staff. And we speak out against prejudice and injustice. And we value independence of thought, which is worth protecting, including, I have to stress, the right to dissent, which has been even here under threat in the last couple of years. I think it's really important to stand up to threats to these principles, because in higher education, it's not just about getting a job. It is the most important function of higher education is to inculcate critical thinking in our students, to encourage people to question how the world is going and how we can improve the world. And from research in many fields in the last 20 or so years, we know that diverse systems of all kinds in economy, in environment, and also in languages are more resilient. That means they have the more capacity to protect themselves in the future. So it's really important to protect this diversity of all kinds, I think. Okay. Seguing on to linguistics in particular, we've been talking about this as linguists for some time, that people all over the world are shifting, as I said, from smaller languages to larger ones, both in indigenous communities and also in migrant communities. There are common processes and attitudes going on there. It's recently been reiterated. Back in 1992, Michael Krauss gave a wake-up call to the linguistics community, saying that if we're not careful, 90% of the field to which we devote ourselves as linguists will disappear by the end of this century. And this has been reiterated by Brahma et al. Just a couple of years ago. To avoid the loss of over 1,500 languages by the end of the century, urgent investment is needed in language documentation, bilingual education, and other community-based programs such as language revitalisation. The trouble is we know that, of course, the funding is really, really squeezed at the moment, particularly across the water in America, where language documentation and language revitalised programs have just totally been cut in the last week or so. So we've really got to prioritise really what we're trying to do, so to make it more effective, which is what I'm going to be talking about later. Okay. The responses to this threat to linguistic diversity come from various fields, particularly from academics. The focus has mostly been to document languages, as Candide has said, whereas communities focus more on language revitalisation, language reclamation. And the United Nations have also got involved. They had a year of indigenous languages in 2019 and became that so successful that they are going to have a whole decade devoted them to, which we're almost halfway through, lasts until 2032. Talk about that more in a minute. Okay. It's important to point out the links between fields. We can't really talk about languages without looking at other other fields. Linguistic diversity is linked to cultural loss, political and economic factors, marginalization of minority communities, which impacts communities and individuals' well-being, health, and social cohesion of communities. So there's a big impact of power relationships here between majority and minoritized groups. And linguistic diversity is also linked to loss of traditional knowledge, which is Candide's particular field of expertise. David Convery, one of our research officers, has pointed out to me that major languages, even in their structures, reflect the majority power dynamics of the communities that gave rise to them, and how they spread around the world, whereas small languages tend to reflect the needs of smaller communities. But what is really important is to recognise is that there's no need to give up small languages to learn another language is something that we're not really very good at publicising as a field. But we need to really make it clear that there are lots of benefits of being multilingual, both on the personal level and on the social level. Just recently, there's been a paper published, and it's a really big sample of people, about 80,000 people were looked at in this survey, and demonstrating that being multilingual can protect you against accelerated aging. It's been found for quite a while, about 20 years or so, it's been shown to delay onset of dementia, if once you could track things like Alzheimer's, between 3 and 5 years. It's not, it's enough to make it worth doing. And also at community level, there's been correlations found between involvement in language revitalisation programs and youth suicide levels in Canada, in Australia. There's been links with health such as diabetes, heart disease, etc. There are a whole swathe of studies that I could mention, but yeah, it's not really the main point of this lecture, but just to say there are huge benefits to being multilingual at both personal and a societal level. Right, so just talk about the International Decade of Indigenous Language, just briefly, okay, and here's a screen grab from their website. And when I have a few problems with this, because when I copied and pasted this, this offer of alt text came up. Text a person wearing a colourful headdress. And one of the issues that we have also, as a field, been criticised for is that it doesn't say who these people are, what language they speak, where they come from. It's really important to recognise the people who speak the languages and the people that we're working with and trying to help, basically, yeah. Because these are their languages. These are not our languages to come and play with. Okay, but having said that, the UN Decade tries to make links with sustainability goals from the UN, which are often equated with resilience. I know resilience proponents don't like that, but they are seen as similar things, sustainability and resilience. And they do try to make links with other fields such, basically education, digital empowerment, health, etc., gender equality, etc., etc., etc. Now, when I first looked at this website a few years ago, at the beginning of the Indigenous Decade, it also mentioned Indigenous rights. Somehow that has disappeared from the website, which again is a little bit concerning, because I think this is again one of the major benefits of being involved in language revitalisation and reclamation is community empowerment. Okay, and this is a field it's quite a big field, the study of language rights, also called linguistic human rights. There isn't a really universally accepted definition of what language rights should be, but this is from a United Nations document. It says, can be described as a series of obligations on state authorities to either use certain languages or to not interfere with the choices and expressions of private parties. So you've got basically the right to use your language in private and also the right to use it in public, such as in education, in the legal system, and so on. But the problem is that these rights and the recognition of them, as well as the recognition of languages, is up to governments, because this is the United Nations, these are nation states who are basically in charge of this stuff. And often governments are reluctant to recognise, especially languages which are related to the national language, and often they are because they're in the same area, as actually separate languages. So in Japan, Ryukyuan languages are not recognised as separate from Japanese, and therefore Ryukyuan people are not recognised as indigenous, and therefore they don't get rights under indigenous people's legislation. Another language that I've been involved with a bit is the Missourish in Poland. Has been fighting and almost there, but not quite. The last hurdle, the president of Poland declined to recognise, even though the parliament did, Missourish as a separate language. And Guernesiais, my own heritage language. And I'm very happy to see two people from Guernsey in the audience today. Thank you so much for coming. Has only 5 years ago been recognised as a language of Guernsey. Okay. And even when that's done, unfortunately, not only in language and linguistic rights and language policies, but pretty much every policy area, there's weak languages. Just because you've got a policy doesn't mean you're going to implement it very well. And this has been seen just recently, in the last week or two, in Nigeria, where in 2022 they had a very progressive policy introduced to have mother tongue education. And some of you will know, because I know some of you are from or worked in Nigeria, that there are a lot of languages in Nigeria, almost 500 perhaps. One of the issues, one of the reasons they've now, in the last week or so, have then said we're going to reverse this policy because it was not effective. Why wasn't it effective? Well, because there weren't enough resources, there wasn't enough teacher training. Well, whose responsibility is that? Yeah, so the policymakers, basically. So, yeah, this is why, it's a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy that if you don't put resources into a policy, it's not going to work. Yeah. Right, okay. So thank you, Candide, for introducing Rise Up. I don't have to talk about it quite so much because, and I don't even remember what the whole side. Its abbreviation is Rise Up, yeah, and it's an international project. And I work with people from, I think, 8 organisations in total from 6 different countries in Europe. It's an European-funded project, so it focuses on languages of Europe. We have 5 case study languages which represent different levels of vitality. Different levels, different contexts, such as cross-border languages, very small languages, much larger languages. And we're also trying to, as well as trying to promote the languages themselves, we're also trying to empower the communities and produce recommendations on good practices and policies to promote healthy linguistic ecosystems. And we've also sponsored activities in creative arts in local languages, and are also trying to develop a learning app which is specifically for minoritized languages, not just add on like something like Duolingo might add on a few minority languages. So yeah, we're still in the process of developing that. Yeah. So back to the theorization now. And move on to that. So Wesley Leonard is a up-and-coming figure, quite established figure in this field now, who has been talking increasingly about a difference between people. Academics love to make distinctions. This is part of what we have to do. So Leonard distinguishes between revitalisation as something that really focuses on language and increasing the number of speakers and how the language is used, versus reclamation, which is broader, focuses on community agency, addressing historical wrongs, promoting the right, language rights. Come back here, you see, to determine our own linguistic futures. In Rise Up, we are trying to bring this back together to conceive language revitalisation as an overarching term, which involves all of these fields. But when we go back again now to rights-based approaches, one of the problems is that when you have language rights recognised, they're generally to use a language which is currently in use, but often not by many people. But the problem is with very, very small languages is that often they are no longer used by many people. So they're what we call post-vernacular languages, no longer vernaculars. And it's often no accident that they've been lost, because there are often repressive policies, there's often low prestige, low social, kind of negative social attitudes towards such languages. And this is why they have not been taught to children over the last few generations. So to anyone who listens, I'm trying to promote the idea that we should try to enshrine the right to reclaim and revitalise languages that we haven't had a chance to learn. Because some people I've interviewed, even in Guernsey, have said, I feel cheated because I didn't get the chance to learn my heritage language. Okay. Yeah, so just basically what I've been trying to do over the last 25 years is to theorize about what's happening in language revitalization and how we might make it more effective. It's a work in progress still. As I mentioned, academics love to categorize stuff, to distinguish between stuff. It's a kind of quite misleading thing to do because things don't fall into neat categories in real life, and I will demonstrate in a minute how some of these categories do overlap. But you can identify themes such as education. It's a very common theme in language revitalization, particularly in schools, but also informal and adult education are very important, particularly where a language is not being taught to kids. You have to teach it to adults first before you can teach it to anyone else. Then you've got awareness raising and prestige is a very common thing to do. And that includes things like campaigning for recognition for your language, doing arts in your language, and having signs in your language, etc., making your language, raising awareness of your language. Then, very importantly, but often not done a lot, is using your language in the community, socializing in your language. Okay. And then we come to the broader issues of relating all these to wider issues such as culture, environment, economics, etc., and also empowerment and well-being for individuals and communities. And I have to say that I have been personally hugely empowered by learning and using my heritage language, so I just want to share that with other people. As I mentioned, these overlap in practice, but I think trying to identify such things helps us to compare the aims and the outcomes, and it's not often done. But because there's a basic, in that whole field, there's a lack of resources and funding, huge competition for that, and so we need to basically work out what our priorities should be in order to maximize the impact of what we do. Yeah. So, a few examples, pretty pictures, and apologies to people who've seen these before. Most of you have seen some of these, but some of you have seen some of these before, I'm sure. Okay, so this was taken actually about 13 years ago when I went to Hawaii for a conference. Vasiliki went to it more recently. And this is one of the first examples of language revitalization, started back in the 1980s, the language nests in Hawaii. And these days it's a full immersion starting from about the age of 2. So these kids here must be about 16 by now, and I really wonder whether they're going to carry on using the language when they leave school. They do have the opportunity to go on to university now in Hawaii through their language. I have to say that this particular school is now under threat from MAGA activists in America. They are saying things like, having such a school that focuses on local language and culture is discriminatory against the wider community. So this is a kind of the sort of thing that we're up against in the fight to promote language diversity. Yeah. At the other end of the linguistic scale, so that was full immersion, everything through your language, is actually very expensive to do. And you need to have training, you need to be able teachers who know the subjects and the language. At the other end, you get language as a subject. And this is, Candide was on this, were you on this visit? Yeah, we visited a community called Nyakur in Thailand, a very small community. And at the time, well, these are homemade materials because no one else is going to do them for them. For kind of basic lessons, just about 1 or 2 hours a week, out of school time, so extracurricular lessons. Unfortunately, at the time we were there, they didn't even have that because they didn't have anyone to take those lessons. So therefore, I think that adult teaching and learning and teacher training are really the priorities we need to start with first. So we're going to now show you a few things that Rise Up has been doing. We have been sponsoring local artists from all of our language communities, and have had an exhibition of those artworks going all around Europe to all of the areas that we're working with. And this is just a picture of one of the events in the Aragonese community in northern Spain, a very, very small community there. And just to say, to show that these it's not just about displaying art, there have also been opportunities for community activities, storytelling, etc. And one of the things we found that it makes links again between the performance aspect of it, but also pride in the community, is that people have been really really encouraged by the fact that a lot of, or pretty much most of the material, the information at these events was through the local languages. This is Cornish, which is the case study that we're responsible for. Kingsley in the audience is very much involved in this. So people were very happy to see that this is more or less in the exhibition in Cornwall back in February was one of the first kind of art events. There was a lot of art events in Cornwall, but not all of them are pretty much all through the Cornish language. Okay. Another of our case study languages is Seto, which is on the border of Russia and Estonia. As in many other places, people come to language through music often, and they get involved in culture, interested in culture, and then they get interested in language. And often also local art and crafts and local costume is a common focus of linking language and culture. And these women very kindly came along, showed us what they were doing, gave us a demonstration, invited us to join in with their singing and dancing, and basically saying that being involved in this stuff, which is a women's activity, really helped them to be empowered through their language and culture. So again, making links between language and other kind of, if you like, areas that need to be promoted. Yeah, sorry, just to say that because gender is an issue that is not often addressed in language policy studies, but I really think it needs to be because it's actually very relevant. Yeah. This is a photo by Song-Woo Kim, one of our former PhD students who focused on Jeju language to the south of Korea, just to demonstrate that in some communities the linguistic landscape is a major focus, so just to show that we have a language and it's out there and it's important, but also to say that, that actually our language has a monetary value as well. And that's important for some people because, that it's one of the reasons people shift languages because they don't see a way of making money through the language. Okay, so back to Cornwall. This is Dan on the left. He's actually a SOAS PhD student studying music in Cornwall. He's been very helpful to our research. So this is a musical event that was as part of a wider community festival that we went to a couple of years ago. We went to this year as well, actually. So again, people getting involved through music, as I mentioned. And as part of this festival, there were also language-specific events. So it's not just an arts festival, it's actually encouraging community use because Cornish is not widely used. It's a very, very post-vernacular language, highly endangered. So one of the few opportunities people have to speak their language is at events that are specifically for that. And so this was a meeting at a bakery in the town where people could get together and practice their language. Okay, and this is happening in Guernsey as well, or has happened. These are a few years old, these particular pictures, and Yan will know about that. Okay, so various events that have been held to try to encourage people to speak Guernesey together. And there's me about to go into one of them a few years ago. Again, a gender issue because some of the women who were involved came to some of the meetings and felt a bit uncomfortable with having men in the same group, so they kind of went to a different table, and it's kind of making people feel comfortable but also empowered, so they're able to speak when they want to. And also, what that helped was also to re-establish intergenerational connections. So there's a young woman and her grandmother kind of reconnecting through language too. And this kind of leads on to something that I think has not been taken up as much as it could be, and I think this is something that we could do more of all around the world. And I'm really happy to say that 2 of my language mentors were actually in the audience today. So thank you for coming so much. This idea started in North America. Basically, you get a fluent speaker, often or a more proficient speaker, generally older but not always. together with a learner or a new speaker of the language, and to do things together, do activities together, just chat together. And just in the last week, my colleague Justina Olko, who Candide mentioned, has been working in Mexico to start a new project along these lines. She's been posting, but this is from her Facebook post about that. And my PhD student, Miho Leslie, who had hoped to be here tonight, but I might have to work, started one of these projects in the Ryukyu Islands, where she comes from, into the south of Japan. And she's given me permission to reproduce this from a paper that she wrote in SOAS, Working Papers in Linguistics, a couple of years ago. Not just describing what's been done, but also trying to theorize about what's happening, how we're making links between speakers, older speakers, new speakers, and then creating peer networks and providing support. Of course, it's not, it's helpful not just to have two people as individuals, but to have a whole network of people involved in the same kind of thing, if you like, what we call a community of practice, working towards a common goal of trying to revitalize the language. Okay, so moving on, and almost there towards the end, the outcomes of language revitalization. I mean, these are all fun activities that I've been talking about, and having fun is actually a valid goal in its own right. It's important to enjoy using your language and to be inspired by such activities. But very often, people do not evaluate the outcomes. I think there's a bit of fear of doing that. But I think that leads to lost opportunities. And we can look at the outcomes in three broad areas, kind of related to what I was mentioning earlier. So the languages themselves. How much documentation have we got? How are they changing? What language contact? Because you always have language contact. You don't shift to another language without there being language contact. And that can lead to changes in the language, particularly among new speakers, and also reactions among some people saying, oh, this language is no longer authentic. Yeah. You can also evaluate the activities. And look at their focus, like I was talking about earlier. Are they educational? Are they prestige, etc. related? Are they community activities? Who's involved in those? I'm afraid I got elders twice here. I'm not sure. Yeah, it's a bit of a glitch. I only really realised that when I was practising about an hour ago, and I didn't have time to change it then. Yeah, who's involved in this? To what extent are they involved? How long? How continuous is their involvement? Because really, and over how long? I haven't said that here because really this is an intergenerational endeavour. Really, language revitalisation. What methodologies are being used in the curriculum development? Is there a kind of cohesive curriculum for this language? What are the teaching methods? Often they're quite old-fashioned, particularly in community schools in the UK. How well are people acquiring the language? How are they doing that? And then we can look at the social impact on the community. Is it beneficial in terms of improving beliefs and attitudes towards the language? Are people being empowered by this? Is the prestige of the language being improved? Are people more confident in using their language? And does it contribute to human and economic development? And is it connecting generations, or is it dividing them by saying, oh, you don't speak their language properly, etc., etc.? Yeah, so almost finally, to conclude almost, like it's not only a cultural and linguistic goal, it's a broader commitment to resilient, diverse and equitable societies. And just last year, Wiltshire Bird, Stephen Birdie came here and gave a talk about this actually a year or two ago, identified two gaps which are kind of along the lines of what I'm talking about. They're giving an overview of a lot of language programs in Australia actually, where Candida's worked. And they say that these two gaps really in the research are how programs work to strengthen communities and to promote commitment, which is really what I was talking about in the last slide as well. Back in 1991, Fishman, the kind of grandfather of language revitalisation, stressed the importance of what he called prior ideological clarification. And that's kind of basically, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? Where are we trying to get to? Evaluation stuff that I said we don't talk about a lot. But very few movements actually do this. So what I'm trying to do now is like post hoc clarification, looking at what's happening exactly, so that we can try to help align our objectives and our activities and our outcomes more effectively, given, as I said, the lack of resources, etc. It is noticeable, I'm not the first person to point this out, that very few movements actually follow Fishman's advice to focus on home and community use. Most people go for education, partly because they haven't got the confidence to speak the language themselves in their communities. And there is this tendency, which again, I'm not the first person to point out, to pass the buck to education or to technology. And AI is the last in a long row of things that people have said are the thing that's going to save our language. No, I'm afraid it's not. What you need to do is actually use your language. This is the really most important thing to do if you're involved in language revitalisation at all. Okay, so yeah, this is more or less it. Thank you very much for coming. This is a fairly... apologies to anyone I've left off this list, because people might be watching it online as well. I couldn't include everyone, but I wanted to include people who have particularly been inspiring or supportive along the way in my career. I want to just pick out in alphabetical order to make people kind of more sort of equal in this. But Peter Roshan happens to be first. He was the person who recruited me to SOAS and has been unfailingly supportive throughout my career. And also on the right, there's a few groups. SOAS Linguistic Department, thank you very much for your, again, more or less unfailing support. The Rise Up team are absolutely great. We've really gelled well. My village community has also been really supportive, particularly in the last few years. I also want to thank people who have gone before and left us behind in the last, people like Richard Baldoff, who gave me my first break in academic publishing, for example. But also particularly want to talk about, mention, here we are, can't see Calvin White at the bottom. As some of you will know, my late partner of 40 years, who sadly died earlier this year. And I'm very happy that he saw me become a professor, but sadly is not here. He would have loved to be here tonight. But yeah, thank you very much, everybody, for coming. Yeah. So, you were invited to scan the code for feedback. Okay. Do I go down there? No.
I'll just come and thank you, Julia. Thank you for that amazing, amazing tour de force, linguistic tour de force. Just really only leaves us to invite everyone to come and greet Julia and each other, as well as we have a reception out in the foyer here. But really, thank you so much. It's been a wonderful, wonderful event, and thanks for everyone for coming.
Thank you.